Okay, our group is doing Chapter 7, Sociological Theories, emphasis on social structure. And this chapter basically emphasizes the social structure in a macro level, and sociologists are trying to help you understand why poor urban areas have higher street crime rates than wealthy urban areas. The social structure is a pattern of social interaction and social relationships within a group or society. The structural conditions are the external forces that affect behavior, like levels of poverty, unemployment, amount of crowded housing. Durkheim felt that basically human nature we're selfish and we have unlimited aspirations, and the left unchecked, it'll result in chaos. He emphasized two mechanisms, socialization and social ties. In order to have a strong society, we need to have a strong collective consciousness. During the early 1800s and 1900s, sociologists had a biased view of deviance, and they believed that it came from people's moral failings, which is social pathology. And in rural areas, there were close relationships, and in urban areas, there's impersonal relationships. But this approach changed over time with the University of Chicago, where they viewed social bonds and social control in a community in the larger aspects. Ernest and Burgess made a concentric zones and sociological experiment where they saw geographical sectors radiating out from the city center, and they found out that inner zones had poorer and more crowded housing and other symptoms of social disorganization. Shaw and McKay did a study in Chicago in the 1900s, and they concluded that adolescents commit more delinquency if they're living in disadvantaged neighborhoods, and middle class delinquents were not part of the study, and they underestimated social organization, so some considered their work rather weak. But there was a revival of the social organization theory later in recent research with self-report and victimization data, where it finds that criminal victimization is high in areas with low participation in organization, few friendship ties, low levels of supervision of adolescents, high degrees of residential mobility, population density, single-parent homes, dilapidated housing. Instead of looking for what's wrong with people, these researchers are looking for what's wrong with society. It also shows that in areas with high economic deprivation and underclass, where people living in persistent poverty and unemployment commit violence and other crime out of frustration, anger, and economic need. There's also the broken windows theory, which says that signs of disorder such as broken windows send a signal to potential criminals that neighborhood residents don't care about what's going on in their surroundings, making crime more likely.
Hi. I'll be talking about more on ecological factors. The kinds of places matter more than kinds of people. Rodney Stark focused on neighborhood physical features to explain high crime and delinquency in urban neighborhoods. His view is referred to as the theory of delinquency. In one proposition, Stark assumed that the denser the neighborhood, the greater the likelihood that good kids will come into contact with bad kids, increasing the pressures on former to break the law. So normal people get caught in a vicious cycle of structural conditions that generate delinquency and crime. Anomie and strain theory. Durkheim felt that anomie or strain results when people's aspirations become uncontrolled and unfulfilled. Merton connected anomie to other forms of deviance. He discounted the assumption that criminality is rooted in biological impulses. In the United States, Merton reasoned that there is too much emphasis on the goal of economic success. As a result, residents often find that they cannot fulfill the American dream unless they commit illegal activity. The problem is greatest for the poor because of their poverty. They lack the ability to achieve economic success through the approved means of working. The strain the poor feels is heightened because society widely believes everyone can be successful if they work hard enough. In response to their strain, the poor may either accept or reject cultural goals of economic success. These possibilities result in logical adaptations to anomie. So the first one is conformity. They accept cultural goals and institutional means, and that means that they continue to be law-abiding members of society. The second is innovation. They accept cultural goals and reject institutional means, meaning they're involved in illegal activity like theft and fraud. Ritualism, they work day after day as a ritual, not to achieve economic success because they reject cultural goals and accept institutional means. Retreatism, they give up. Merton included alcoholics, drug addicts, and hobos in this category. And the last one, rebellion, they are radicals and revolutionaries of society who often break the law and attempt to transform it. So the evaluation of enemy theory. Merton's enemy provides a structural explanation for some crimes by the poor in the United States, but fails to address middle-class delinquency, white-collar offenses, and violent crimes. His retreatism adaptation assumes people have given up, but instead, alcoholism and drug use occurs as a result of peer influences, and the enemy theory fails to explain why people choose one adaptation over the other. The defense is an extension of enemy theory. In Merton's defense, social class and offending appears to be supported for serious offenses and can also be extended to cover middle-class delinquency and white-collar crime given the importance of economic success. Stephen Messner and Richard Rosenfeld institutional enemy theory states that crime in the United States results from several key cultural values, such as achievement, individualism, universalism, and the fetishism of money. To achieve the American dream, people eagerly pursue economic success in a society whose universal ideology is that anyone, rich or poor, has a chance of success. This creates intense pressure, and many people feel they lack enough money and turn to crime. General strain theory broadens strain theory's focus beyond economic goals and success. Robert Agnew argued that adolescent strain results not only from failure to achieve economic goals, but also from failure to achieve non-economic goals. Lastly, stressful events occurring closely in time cause more stress than events occurring far apart. Various kinds of strain predict delinquency, such as the death or serious injury of a family member or friend, a change in school or residence, and victimization by physical and sexual abuse and other crimes, and unemployment.
Hi, I'm Sean, and I'll be talking about subculture theories. Albert K. Cohen wrote a book called Delinquent Boys in 1955. He believed that lower-class boys had higher levels of delinquency. They were delinquent more for thrills than economic reasons, and because of their lack of middle-class values, they would turn to gang life. Some criticisms of his theories was that he overlooked the middle-class delinquency, concerns his assumption with delinquent is non-utilitarian, and he didn't explain why most or some males that were poor didn't do delinquent behavior. Walter B. Miller believed that just being in the lower class creates delinquent behavior. He had 6 focal concerns: trouble, which means that they would gain prestige by being in trouble; toughness, because of their lack of male role models, they had female head households, which made their masculinity, and they had extreme homophobia. Smartness, their society, they believed that they had to outwit each other and not get outwitted. Excitement was the pursuit of excitement in their lives, which they would get in fights and strive for having sex and stuff like that. Fate, because they had a fatalistic look on life, meaning that they figured that they would, since they were in a lower class society, they would turn to crime. It was just a matter of time. Autonomy, because of their rejection of authority, they didn't trust the police and such. The criticism of his was some middle-class boys exhibited these behaviors too. Richard Cloward and Lloyd Owen had their differential opportunity theory, which was an extension of Merton's theory. They believed that the rich had better access than the poor. One of their main points was the differential access to illegitimate means. The young people in these lower class areas would gravitate towards crime. There was a criminal subculture in some areas, meaning that there was an organized crime that young were drawn to. There was another theory was conflict structure, which there wasn't organized crime, but there were a few adults in society that befriended the young, and they committed crime that way. Some criticism of this theory was that it doesn't take in the middle class or white-collar crime. Marvin Wolfgang and Frank Faracuti had a theory of subculture of violence, which means the lower class has an obsession with masculinity, so any argument or disagreement, they would turn to violence and fighting. Elijah Anderson had a theory of the code of the street. He studied African Americans in Philadelphia in lower class areas, and one thing was their striving for respect would ultimately lead to violence and delinquent behavior, because every time they could have an encounter, it was an opportunity for respect, and respect was what was the most important thing of them in their society. They adopted a look, a dress, a talk, just how they were to get respect. Another way to get respect was to initiate violence, to call people out and get in fights, and they had a distrust for the law because they didn't believe the police could protect them, and they would solve their problems by means of violence and delinquent behavior rather than call the police. In the end, there are many theories that explain delinquent behavior of males, but not very many of females. So now people are trying to figure out and start theories that would be developed to explain female delinquency, but none of that really can explain why females commit crime more than males.